Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Doug Cossa, CIO, DIA. Now, please welcome INSA Executive Vice President John Doyon.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our program. Today, we're excited to host one of our community's top leaders. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, if you have questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll do my best to get to as many of your questions as possible. Also, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call. Please note that the program is on the record and being recorded. Also, in the handouts section, you'll find information about INSA's graduate student internship program. We have quite a few students registered today, so please take a moment to download the file, and if you're eligible, we hope you'll consider applying. The deadline is Monday, October 28th. Lastly, a big thanks to our sponsor, DODIIS, for their support of this program. We could not bring you this level of thought leadership without them. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Catherine Bolger, Senior Vice President and Business Area Manager for Defense and Intelligence IT at DODIIS, who will introduce our speaker. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, John, and thanks to INSA for hosting this morning's discussion. DODIIS is proud of our current work within the DIA, providing, maintaining, and modernizing its IT systems and mission software. We leverage our insights that we've acquired across multiple prime contracts in the IC community and our core competencies in digital modernization and defensive cyber operations to further DIA's important intelligence community mission. It is truly a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. Doug Cossa is the Chief Information Officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he leads a global team of over 4,000 professionals and manages more than $1 billion in resources. His team provides the complete spectrum of information technology services to the agency and the broader intelligence community. Mr. Cossa also oversees the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, the federal government's top secret intelligence network. In addition, he is the program lead for the upcoming DODIIS Worldwide Conference in Omaha, Nebraska later this month, where many of us will be attending. And prior to his role, Mr. Cossa served as the Deputy DIA CIO and as the Deputy Director of the Mission Integration Division at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Doug Cossa.
Hey, Doug, glad to see you and welcome, and thank you, Catherine, for that introduction, and really look forward to our discussion today. And to kick it off, we are going to ask our audience a poll question, and I think the poll question is ready to go. Here we go. And the poll question, as you can see, it's a yes or no. Are you attending DODIIS this year? And so our audience can go ahead and reply to that question, and we'll share those results in a few moments. But I wanted to again say thank you, Doug, and we're here to talk with you about DODIIS and what's coming. And I already have that we have over half, 52% of our listeners this morning are going to be attending DODIIS. So this sneak preview will be a special interest to them. And wanted to ask you about the program and the theme you chose. So maybe we'll start with that. Integrated deterrence through IT superiority. How'd you get that theme for this year's DODIIS, and what does it mean to you?
Well, so one, it's in the National Intelligence Strategy and National Defense Strategy. So the integrated deterrence or integrated defense, as it's called within the NDS. But it actually points back to the nature of where technology is going and how that intersects with a lot of world events that we see today, particularly in the news. I'm sure prior panelists have talked about, especially from the Intel and department side, about strategic competition in China, which is certainly one of the top priorities for both the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. So in terms of the theme of the conference, it relates to exactly that. In fact, Xi Jinping has a quote, "Advanced technology is the sharpest weapon of any nation state," right? And so as we look at competition, whether it's a competition for resources or a competition for value, over time, as we look back in history, and I love to look at history, a lot of talks that I give, you'll see that I point back to the evolution of technology and how that shaped national security and defense over, really centuries. But that quote, in terms of the sharpest weapon of any modern state, that's always been the case of countries over time. Nations have always raced towards technology and advancing their own agenda. Like I said, whether that's for resources or values. And that's true of the US as well. I remind folks that even on this call, you did not type in a country code to get here and log online, right? Like you would in any other country around the world. We typed in a .com and got to this web platform. And the reason why we have a .com and not a .country code is because we started the infrastructure for the World Wide Web and the internet back in the day, right? So as we look to shaping the future, right, those who own the infrastructure, own the platforms, are the ones that actually shape the nature of how events unfold and response to those events. But the reality for technology, as we've looked over time and how we've used it as a weapon, both offensively and defensively, the cycle times for developing those technologies has obviously gotten shorter over time. It's gotten smaller and smaller, and it's been harder to control. And so as a community, we have to look at this as two aspects. One, what's that opportunity? And that opportunity looks at what are the emerging technologies? How do we adopt those? And how do we change not only the way we operate, but the culture in which we operate? As we've seen, technology takes a long time to actually adopt, right? It's always promising, but as we look to adopt it, that requires a culture shift and a mindset shift. That's one value of DODIIS, is that it exposes us to those early and what those opportunities are, and an opportunity to experiment with those technologies as well. As we look at the interconnectedness of that technology and how it shapes world events, we've seen that with things such as the Arab Spring. And I know you saw that in your career, during your time in NSA, is that technology is getting into the hands sooner with those short development times, the short deployment times. We see white papers for technology out in open source before, they've been peer reviewed and validated, and they're picking those up and experimenting. And so what DODIIS provides is, it's not just the opportunity to experiment, but also from an intelligence and defense aspect, understand what the implications of emerging technologies are, right? Think about the ways that those could be used. And that's true of any technology, right? Back in the day, traditional technologies had a single purpose, a narrow purpose. Think about even JWICs as an example. We're coming up on our over our 30th anniversary, almost 35th anniversary of JWICs. And that started as a voice and video system, right? It was actually an experiment to see if we could share secure video at the top secret level between DIA and the Pentagon. And it worked. And this was the time, the advent of the internet. And so we had additional bandwidth and we added email. And now it's really the command and control for how we do everything at the top level. And we never anticipated that. It grew over time. It was an evolution. But it was understanding what those emerging technologies were at the time. A lot of the internet technologies like email that we hadn't used in the past. The DODIIS conference allows us to get exposed to those opportunities and think about how we might leverage them, and then shape our business practices, and then adopt them early in an experimentation phase, and ultimately become a fabric of part of how we do business that makes us more efficient. And that's really what I see the value as, and that's how that theme of integrated deterrence through IT superiority relates to what DODIIS is all about.
Nice. So I know it's a couple days long conference. I'm curious, what are some of the key highlights or sessions that people that are attending should look forward to? And by the way, I was thinking about this. You all pretty much always record these sessions as well, and I believe they get posted online for people to review afterwards. So even if you're not there in person, you have the chance to access the content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we live stream it and then it's posted.
Live stream.
Yep.
Cool.
Actually,
what are some of the key highlights you're expecting?
Yeah, so one, of course, are my priorities as CIO. And those have really been shaped into three areas during my tenure. One, of course, is JWICs. So we have taken on a very large scale initiative to modernize JWICs, ranging from just not only the tech refresh, but how we automate the management of the network. Think about it kind of like as Waze that you use, in your car, to where we started back in the day with physical maps, and we manually put together a route for how we would get from point A to point B. Never anticipated, traffic flow as part of that. And then today, in a more modern era, we leverage data to actually automate our transit points and also alternate transit points for how we get to point A and point B. That's really where we're going with JWICS, is moving from a manual system to an automated system, to where we route around not only congestion in the network or vulnerabilities in the network, but also opportunities to make that more efficient and secure. So that's really what the next generation of the JWICS architecture looks like. It's taking the person out of the loop and the management of that, and then looking at ways to automate that in a smart kind of way. That's definitely a big priority, will remain a big priority for the next several years. Part of that includes an R&D budget to where we experiment with new technologies, and that's what DODIIS exposes us to. So you'll see a lot of discussion on that, but you'll also see a lot of breakout sessions on the automation of networks and the security of networks, and not just from DIA, but other agencies such as NSA, NRO, NGA, and even across DoD. As we look into the next generation of our cloud contracts, especially JWCC on the DoD side, we have joint use agreements. So we're not only looking at how we leverage each other's transport, like JWICS on the top secret side, to move traffic, whether that's cloud or on-prem, from one area to another, but also the cloud service provider infrastructure. So we're not duplicating across different fabrics. A lot of what we will use on the secret side can be leveraged on the top secret side, and vice versa. But also DoD has unique requirements across those fabrics, as does the IC, but there are opportunities for efficiency and collaboration. And you'll hear a lot of that in the breakout panels as well, of where the DoD and the IC parts are joining forces for efficiency, but also collaboration. Edge connectivity is huge as part of networks, so not just JWICS, but across the board. How do we create connectivity in areas that are denied or degraded? This has been a big part of mine, probably one of the driving requirements that I get every single day. And even an example of that is what we're seeing within weather events, just like we experienced last week down along the East Coast in Florida, and where we're going today. If an infrastructure is not there to support regular communications, what are the alternate means to actually deploying something that's capable, that keeps connected as a community? So a lot of discussion on that. As we look to the future, well, I should say even over the next couple of years, what you'll hear a lot of from the director of NGA, our leadership at DIA, NRO leadership and their CIOs, is creating a common intel picture. You're going to start to hear a lot more about this. We all have tools and methods for making sense of the data that we're using. For DIA, that's all source data, right? We have, I'm sure you've heard about it in the past, MARS, of how we're transitioning MIT to a more modern system to make sense of foundational military intelligence data. NGA is doing the same with their Project Maven for GeoInt data, NRO the same for what they do on the space side. And you'll hear from a lot of other services too, such as Spacecom, Navy intelligence, of how they're using data to create a common intel picture. The challenge we have ahead of us is, how do we actually integrate that data into one common operating picture? And this is a priority of not just the DNI, but the USDINS, of collaborating across the intelligence and defense enterprise to create that common operating picture, to where we are all leveraging each other's data in an authoritative way, but the same sheet of music in a synchronized fashion. You'll hear a lot about that. I think you'll hear a lot about the functional priorities and requirements that we have surrounding how we do that. It is an age-old problem. Catherine and I were just discussing our careers before we started, and how a lot of the same problems we were trying to solve 20, 30 years ago are still here today. And this is one for me. When I had, oh, that's cute. When I had the opportunity to work at NRO and NGA years ago, this was over 20 years ago, that is exactly what I did. I was a database administrator and system architect that took across disparate data from NGA and NRO and tried to create a common intel picture. The challenge we have today is we have a lot more data, a lot more sources. How do we ensure the integrity of that data and that we're looking at the right thing to make critical decisions?
Yeah.
So that will definitely be a theme that you hear.
Hey, let me ask you a question on. Thanks for going through these themes. And one thing I'm thinking about, maybe we had it 30 years ago, but we didn't have it quite in the same way, and that's our AI capabilities, our artificial intelligence capabilities. So when you're talking about JWIC's modernization and moving from manual to automated, I immediately start to think about, hey, what is DIA doing to adopt AI tools as part of its approach to the JWIC's problem and frankly, these other priorities as well. Can you share some about how you're incorporating AI and maybe what you're doing differently from some of the other parts of the IC?
Sure. So for us, we have, again, the unique mission of being a service provider for the federal government on JWIC, so networks. So just like as I was explaining, moving from a manual to an automated means is really based on, in a sense, automation, which you could classify as artificial intelligence. I mean, the primary foundation of artificial intelligence, if we break it down, especially large language models, is statistics, right? It's looking at observables that relate to each other over time. And that is extremely important in understanding the nature of network traffic, certain events of how that traffic responds, how it doesn't respond, to automate and really use algorithms to automate the management of networks. So that is certainly one that I'm looking not just across JWICs, but our international systems and all the other collaboration systems that DIA runs as a service of common concern for the IC and DOD. When we look at it on the analytics side, certainly Mars is one of the flagship programs that we have in the agency that's looking at how do we automate and visualize the historical nature of foundational military infrastructure targets. That is certainly one, and part of that is creating an object management system. So we have authoritative objects and authoritative attributes to those objects that we can share across the community. A lot of what my role is in AI is less on the analytic front end. That's where the collection and the analytic functions of not only DIA, but the other components of the IC come in. Where I'm unique is I provide the infrastructure. So the storage, the compute, the transport associated with how we get data to feed those algorithms. Another unique aspect that I have as a CIO is we have security and data management as part of our functions. So our CISO and CDO are part of our CIO team. Where I think you'll see a lot of emphasis, especially as the DODIIS conference, is in governance and ethics. And the IC is different in DoD in the sense that we are making very critical decisions based on data, right? So that data, we have to have the provenance of the data, we have to know the security of the data, we have to ensure that what we're looking at is the authoritative source, and that comes from governance and ethics. As we move into the future, this is going to be hard. You know, data itself has always you can kind of wrap it up into 3 phases. One is collecting the data, right? That's traditionally been hard, but it's getting a lot easier. The second is adding meaning to that data, which is done through statistics, and I talked about that. So there's tradecraft around how we actually make sense of the data that we have to govern. And then this is where ethics comes in, is leveraging the power from that data. And this is traditionally been the function of governments over time. So as you think about COVID and vaccines, right? We leverage government entities to make sense of that data and provide direction and add meaning to it. As we look into the future, and even now, that's being challenged, right? Of who is the authoritative truth on what that data is and how it's to be used. And that's where ethics comes in. And this is something obviously that the IC has been challenged with over time, right? Can't believe it's been over 10 years now, but some of the intelligence disclosures that have happened called into question the data that the IC uses, how it's used, whether it's actually used, right? These are struggles, especially with the rise in data that we're using to make decisions. that we are going to have to really adapt to and change our business processes around and add additional forms of governance and ethics. And that is, as a CIO, as part of that whole cybersecurity and data function, we're going to be challenged with. And so a lot of discussion of how do we wrap our arms around that governance and ethics, that we have to stand up first before we just jump right into this.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to loop back, Doug, to something you had mentioned about sort of some of your core functions in the CIO. You mentioned compute power and storage and some things like that. And then I'll add, I know Admiral Whitworth, the director of NGA, has been speaking some about getting Project Maven to where they want it to be. And right. Some of the challenges there that they're finding is they don't necessarily have the compute power that they need for where they want to go, and perhaps storage as well. I'm interested in some of the challenges that you have at DIA, especially perhaps you mentioned Maven and Mars, so maybe there's some challenges with Mars. Where are you with compute power? I guess nobody ever has as much as they would really like, but how are you doing with your, some of those foundational capabilities that you provide out of the CIO organization? And so what are your plans and what are you looking at there?
So, and another way to wrap around that question would be, do we have enough storage and compute power to support where we're going, now and into the future? And I think anyone's answer to that would, of course, be no. But I'll caveat it with it depends. And let's take the example of GPT-3 and 4. What is the difference between those two? GPT-4 uses the entire internet, right, as part of its algorithm. Is that something that we need to support our functions to that scale? Maybe. But what I will say is that the nature of CIOs are also changing in terms of determining the strategies for what we store, how we store it, etc. And I'll give you an example of any crisis situation. So let's take the Afghanistan retrograde as an example of, we supported the comms, DIA CIO as part of that. When we support communications, especially in degraded environments with not a lot of infrastructure, we have to determine what we use and the priority of how that's used. So what data goes across, because we can't just transmit everything. That comes from a mission need. So we don't necessarily need all data for all missions, right? We have to filter that data based on what we're trying to do. There's a big mission role in that. And that relates to storage of what do we need to store? What do we have to store in cold storage versus hot storage that we need to pull right off immediately? There's a strategy that goes into that, and the requirements for storage and processing are going to be different based on the function being performed. I think for open source, that's a hard challenge, right? Because you quite literally are using everything that you have access to, such as on the internet. When we look at a function, let's just say, human or SIGINT, it would be more defined in terms of what we need to store in some cases. It's a much more targeted function that doesn't require necessarily all data that you would have to store at all times. So that's a hard question to answer, but the reality is that over time, right, IT is kind of looked at as a commodity, right? So it's kind of like electricity or water. You don't think about it until you don't have it, right? And then it becomes a terrible situation when you're in a time where you don't have it. I think over the past several decades, the investment in IT has ebbed and flowed. I think we're now starting to see that IT in itself is the mission. It's integral to everything we do. COVID is a perfect example of that. We were talking about these coffees and conversations before we got started, and how you move to an online platform and sustain that. That requires a change in how we operate and what we need to do. And technology is integral now to every function that we perform. Do we have enough technology to do everything we want to do? No, absolutely not. And the same is true for storage and processing power. We don't have enough to do everything that we can conceive of. But we also couldn't afford that, and it wouldn't be the most efficient use of resources either. We've got to define where the opportunity is for automation and AI, and then put together what that strategy is based on where we would have the biggest bang for its buck.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you another, by the way, we're getting a lot of audience questions in, so thank you. So I'm going to pivot to those in a minute. But one more question about DODIIS, which is our primary topic today. Sort of, it's a two-parter. What do you see, or what are you looking for from the companies and the vendors who are going to be at DODIIS? What are you looking for is regarding hearing from them or seeing what they have? And then also overall, what are some of the takeaways that you expect from DODIIS and also that attendees can expect?
Sure. So in terms of, I'll just go with the top three. Obviously, zero trust has been a topic, and more so than just cybersecurity, zero trust is really becoming a data strategy of how do we get to the right data to the right people. Looking for opportunities for how we expand that. For DIA, and I know this is the case of many other IC agencies, we're all in on the data pillar, right? That's pretty much where we're starting, of looking at fine-grained entitlements, which not just supports, like I say, security and insider threat objectives, but making sure the right data gets to the right intelligence and defense function. So that's certainly one. Edge connectivity I mentioned. How do we get connectivity and data to really hard to reach places? And then as we also look at IT accessibility. So I've talked about in the past of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Probably the most innovative things that we've done over the past couple of years in that space, and those have come directly out of the DODIIS conference in terms of things like speech to text, text to speech, capabilities for vision impaired, all of that actually that we've deployed across not just DIA, but the broader IC and DoD has come from the DODIIS conference. And so opportunities to actually enhance in that space is something we really look forward to.
Great. Hey, by the way, I'll mention INSA is going to have a program on edge connectivity on the 17th of October. So we'll share more information on that. But it's certainly one of the top issues that we're looking at these days as a community. Let me go to some of the audience questions. I know you mentioned a moment ago, Doug, you talked about open source. So there's a question from one of the leaders at Guidehouse who asked, how is your office supporting Postman, which is the primary open source tasking management aggregation network? How are you supporting Postman and the needs and priorities surrounding OSINT?
Sure. So probably the easiest way to characterize Postman is really that collection management system, that functional management system for how we manage open source, right? So thinking about it in your kind of traditional tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, and disseminating reportings, TCPED. Postman is really the next generation system for how we do open source intelligence, the functional management of that in the community. From a technology perspective, my role in there is actually multiple. So one, of course, on the top secret side, it's the networking piece of that. The second is on the platform side of hosting it and the strategy we need to put in place for ensuring that we can get Postman to the right places, especially on a cloud infrastructure. So thinking of containerization and how we deploy that and synchronize data and operations of open source across the various entities that need to access that. And then, of course, on the reporting side of it, the application, the front end piece of how the users interact with it, but also pull data from that system. So I'm actually at all layers of the stack, from networking all the way up to the user interaction and application side. Like anything, like any technology, integration is key. So we're not only integrating, across different departments, especially on the DoD side, where we have many different users from many different organizations, but also across fabrics. So when you think about unclassified, secret, and top secret, looking at cross-domain technologies, how we integrate Postman as part of the larger cross-domain, how we do identity management and leverage those enterprise services to make sure, again, that those that need access have access, and how we enforce entitlements. So for Postman, my role is really across the board and everything that it takes to stand up an application, host it, and provide access to across the community.
Great. Hey, we have another question in here from someone I believe you know well. His name is Scott Barrier. And so General Barrier asked, how's it going? How is the migration of Mars to SIPR going? And what are you doing as a CIO to expedite the process?
Okay, well, that's a great question. So we expect that Mars will be ATO'd on SIPR within the next few weeks, actually. So that assessment is underway right now. It's going well. Obviously, leveraging a lot of the lessons learned that we used on the high side to do that. I will say that one area where we have really put emphasis on is part of Zero Trust. And so the investments that DIA has received in Zero Trust over the past year and in FY25, we're actually putting towards Mars. So Mars is I wouldn't say test bed, it is the first program out of the gate that will actually use our fine grade entitlements as part of our Zero Trust strategy, right? And as I said before, our Zero Trust strategy and our data strategy go hand in hand. And so when I say Zero Trust as it relates to Mars, we're looking at how do we ensure that of all of the sources that Mars pulls from, all around the IC and DOD for foundational military intelligence, one, intersect with Mars, integrate with Mars, but two, we can ensure the integrity of that data as it moves in and out of different environments. That actually is being done through our Zero Trust strategy. Through our fine grained entitlements as well, to making sure the right people receive it. When you think about what that means for Mars, but also all of our systems into the future, especially with international partners, today what we do is we have individual networks, whether it's Stone Ghost for the 5i or any of the other individual bilat systems that we run. And this is where right now, what the strategy is we put those in containers and we deploy applications such as Mars on those different infrastructures. When we think about where Zero Trust brings us, it means that in entitlements and how we ensure the integrity of that data, not only at the user level, but at the device level, it means that we don't need these disparate networks anymore. We can actually host data in one place and regulate and control and secure access through those fine grade entitlements for both users and devices. That's the future of where we're going. And so, when we say we're going to put Mars on SIPR, yeah, we're going to, but what we want to see in the future, and really the objective is we don't have to deploy to different networks. We deploy in one area and we manage the accesses through entitlements.
Cool. You mentioned ATOs, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks, a Mars ATO for SIPR, but that gets to another question we have from audience member here from Zach Smith from Accrete AI, and he asked, what is DIA doing to accelerate ATOs, or authority to operate, to leverage the latest AI and data handling capabilities to really make those ATO awards go faster?
Right. So ATOs are complex. Today across the community, it's a very manual process. Right, you have assessors that manually look at controls and manually inspect the applications or infrastructure and ensure that those controls are in place. Very manual process today. Pointing back to DODIIS and where our interest areas are, that's one of them. Of how do we automate the things that are checklists, and then as part of the ATO process, inherit the controls where we can inherit, and really point our analysis into the manual analysis, I should say, and there will always be an aspect, point that to where the hosting environment is unique, right? So the heavy lift in the ATO process right now, it comes today, is, like I say, it's manual, but where the focus needs to be is where can we adopt the controls where the controls are similar across different agencies that may have already adopted or have ATO'd something, and we want that reciprocity. How do we share the body of evidence to just adopt that and automate where there is similarities, and then focus analysis where the environments are unique, right? So not every agency has the same exact hosting environment, which is why there will always be some unique aspects, some unique work that each agency needs to do. But we absolutely need to put in place ways to automate the inheritance of controls to where there are those similarities across the community. I know DoD CIO has put out guidance that says we need to do that. The DNI is done the same. It is certainly an area that we need to speed up, but the reality is there are a lot of different controls out there. I think on the order of 500 plus controls that need to be assessed. The selection of those controls by agencies are really determined based on the uniqueness of their environment. There are some similarities, but not all. Just because an application or infrastructure is hosted and ATO'd in one environment doesn't mean there can be automated adoption in another, right? There might be a different fabric with different standards. So there are opportunities, though, to streamline that, and that's something we need to look at. It is a very manual process today, and I'm very interested in technologies that help automate where there is the opportunity for adoption here.
Well, hopefully we'll see some good ideas at the DODIIS this year.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got a couple of questions in back to JWICS, which I know is the top of your list as far as your priorities. One is, I guess, putting them together. It's basically about upcoming milestones. What JWICS modernization benchmarks or updates or do you see in the next 6 to 12 months?
Sure. So I think in terms of the immediate goals, what I'll say, and hard to explain in this forum, right, without crossing a line into the classified realm, but we are almost done with tech refresh. We're essentially there. That has been the focus over the past 2 years since we started the program of really replacing the antiquated infrastructure, especially where we have critical nodes. And I don't necessarily mean tech refresh at the device level when you think about routers and switches and encryption and everything that goes along with providing connectivity, but modernizing the redundancy of that connectivity as well, right? So eliminating the single points of failure. At the end of the day, what any effective network is it's modular. It's a mesh network to where if one point goes down, you've got alternate routes, just like a highway system, right? You don't want to just have one exit. You want multiple on-ramps and off-ramps. That's where we are on the tail end of completing. Where we get into the out years over the next couple of years is the automation of that. So how do we move into software-defined networking to where we can identify issues or errors early? In the past, as we've experienced networking problems, it's always an after the fact of, okay, what happened? How do we move that question up front before an outage occurs is really the aim over the next 3 years. It's enhancing the monitoring of network traffic and connectivity, and then of course, automating the management of that as we start to see anomalies. And then especially from the cybersecurity side is how do we isolate parts of the network that aren't operating towards their norm? And that's where a lot of that AI, as I mentioned, comes in. There are trends in data, trends in network packets, and how those are managed and flow. And based on those trends, we can certainly automate the management of how we operate. JWICS and all the other networks that we do actually have the role of operating.
Okay. Hey, we also have a couple of questions. There's no discussion with the CIO is complete if you don't talk about cloud computing.
Yes.
So we have a couple questions here. One says, does DIA have a cloud center of excellence? What are your accommodations for multiple cloud environments? There's another here, is cloud a destination or an operating model? Can you discuss a little bit how DIA is envisioning using clouds, multiple clouds in your mission, and maybe what some of your challenges or opportunities are there in the next year or so?
Sure. So we operate our cloud team out of our data engineering division within CIO. That is actually under our chief data officer. So we look at cloud as part of our larger data strategy, a tool in that. In terms of the way forward for us, our strategy really falls across both the DoD side and the IC side when it comes to all cloud functionality, whether it's storage, processing, security, etc. Because we provide services to two different customers. In terms of our path forward over the next year, we are looking to, under C2E, release task orders, so essentially sandboxes to all the cloud service providers to really experiment in the technologies that we're looking at. Right now, today, we've deployed Amazon as well as Microsoft. We are moving out with the IC on 365, and we are looking to work with the other cloud service providers in their areas through the upcoming task orders that we're going to release out of C2E. For me, technology has always been an evolution, right? You learn a little bit as you go. For us, the strategy is using the right cloud service for the right function that we're trying to achieve. I think where the IC had a big lesson learned in the early days was move everything to the cloud. Well, not every application, right, is necessarily factored for the cloud to take advantage of the elasticity that comes with it. For us on the business side, that's really been our emphasis. And so as we look at HR modernization and where we're going, and really looking at capabilities as a service in the human resource realm, cloud is huge for us. Same with on contract management. And as we're replacing our older contract management systems with new, cloud hosting is big for us because you can take advantage of that elasticity. One of the best examples that I've learned as CIO is every year we do performance management reviews. Every year there's a surge in usage and the system goes down, right? So moving that over to cloud allows us to take care of the elasticity problem that we have with usage and storage, et cetera. Same thing for contracts, right? As you get to the end of the fiscal year, there's always a surge. That's what I mean by using the right cloud service for the right tool, or the right tool for the right cloud service for the right problem that we're trying to solve.
Great. Hey, so you talked a little bit about some contracting. So we have a question here that says, you know, we always have a lot of companies on the line, a lot of perhaps newer companies, small companies like to dial in and hear what you have to say. What's the best way for a non-traditional DoD contractor to start working with DIA?
So actually, there is going to be at DODIIS a breakout session called Doing Business with DIA. And so that's going to be an introduction to how to interact with DIA. And in particular, there's going to be a focus on 8A companies, also a mentor protege program that we're standing up. So big opportunities there at DODIIS to take advantage of in terms of that breakout session with our CFO and contracting office. In terms of opportunities, we also host something called Mediapedia, which is where different functions, components of the agency put out needs, whether it's towards an immediate need or experimentation. That is an area for us to on-ramp and experiment. And at DODIIS, we're actually going to have a representative from Mediapedia to explain how to take advantage of that. So multiple ways, but Mediapedia, when we think about the adoption and experimentation with newer technologies and companies that haven't done business with DIA in the past, is really one of the primary avenues for doing that.
Okay. Hey, we're just about out of time, but I have a final question. Any final thoughts, but especially, is there anything else you want us to know about DODIIS? It's only about a little less than 3 weeks away now.
Yeah, it is. So DODIIS, as I mentioned, in Omaha this year. Omaha was my first DODIIS conference. I actually think over the past 7 years that it's been one of the best. Right now, it's tracking to be one of the largest. San Antonio was our largest a few years back with about over 5,000 participants. This upcoming DODIIS conference is tracking about to be the same. And you know that it's at a command, StratCom. The most innovative things that we've done as DIA CIO, and I know this is true of other services and agencies, are for the StratCom customer. So a large presence from not only the command itself, and the commander will be speaking on the first day, but also the services that operate in the area, as well as academia and industry. So we get a lot of participation from a lot of different diverse users, but also vendors across both, broader federal industry and also government. So really looking forward to that. That's what's going to make this unique and different than other years in the past. But again, that's great to hear that almost half of the participants here today will be attending. So thank you.
Well, I'll be one of them, and I look forward to joining you in Omaha. And Doug, I want to thank you so much for taking time this morning to chat with our audience here and share some insights into DODIIS and other challenges you're facing as DIA's CIO. And I also want to give a big thank you to Leidos for sponsoring the program today. To everyone that joined us online, thanks for tuning in. Also, when the webinar ends, a short survey will appear. Please take a moment to share your feedback with us. We read all of your feedback, and we hope you'll share some insights with us. Looking ahead, next week on Tuesday, October the 15th, we'll host another coffee and conversation. This time it'll be with James Blasingame and Dr. Catherine Camilletti from NCSC's Enterprise Threat Mitigation Directorate. We'll discuss insider threat and the new counterintelligence strategy. On October 17th, as I referenced during the discussion, INSA will be holding an event called Deploying AI at the Edge, Building a Resilient Architecture. This will be a classified discussion and including a keynote and panel. Our speakers include NSA's CISO, Mark Sullivan, NGA's CIO, Mark Chatelain, Zeke Maldonado, who's the Technology and Data Services Director at DHS INS, and the panel will be moderated by Dr. John Beeler, former Chief AI Officer for the IC and now the Executive Director of ARLIS. Looking ahead to next month, we'll have a coffee and conversation with Gurpreet Bhatia, who's the Principal Director for Cybersecurity and the Deputy CISO at the Defense Department. Then on 14th of November, we'll be hosting Doug Cossa's boss, DIA Director Jeffrey Cruz, at the Hilton McLean Tyson Center for a leadership dinner. We hope you can come and enjoy an evening with General Cruz. You can learn more about these and all our programs on insaonline.org. That concludes our today's program. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.